Welcome to the Focused and Fearless podcast, the show designed to explore how you can step into powerful self-leadership and stop settling for less in your life, business, health, and wealth. I'm your host, Heather Angel, and as a certified energy practitioner, coach, and online business consultant with over a decade of experience, you can expect expansive, honest, and enlightening conversations about what it really takes to create the changes in your life and business that right now may just feel completely out of reach. Thank you for choosing to invest in yourself by listening to this episode. Without further ado, let's dive in. How confident do you feel having difficult conversations? This is the topic of today's episode. And if you have a team, if you're thinking about hiring your first VA, this episode is essential listening because today my guest expert is Nicole Posner. She is an expert in conflict resolution and high-level communication. She supports and empowers leaders, business owners, and high-performing teams to communicate more effectively and successfully so that they can navigate difficult conversations with confidence and ease. Now, like I said at the beginning, if you don't have a big team right now, this episode is still for you because even if it's just you, your laptop, and your kitchen table right now, eventually you will need some kind of help, even if it's a VA for a couple of hours a week. Being able to effectively communicate with that assistant, with that VA, with your team is essential to make sure that you get the most out of them, to make sure that they feel heard, they feel seen, and that your business runs smoothly. This episode was an absolute joy to record because I'm not hearing this conversation happening enough. Communication is key to everything. So without further ado, let's dive in. Oh, welcome to the Focused and Fearless podcast, my lovely.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Lovely to be here.
It's so good to have you here because, as I said in the intro, this is a conversation that I don't hear very often. And I think it's a conversation that needs to be had a lot earlier on in our business development because, as you're going to share with us, things can go mighty wrong for our teams, for our businesses as a whole, if we don't address team communication, if we don't address what conflict will look like and how it can raise its ugly head if we don't have those foundations in place at the beginning. So before we go into helping the listeners make sure they do have those foundations in place, what are you seeing in the work that you're doing? What do you see? What are you having to help clients with when it comes to sort of conflict resolution and those difficult conversations?
I think the one that I see the most often is managing situations where you've literally hit a block in a relationship breakdown where people cannot even be in the same room anymore. I've done mediations over the years where, and this I think actually was my very first mediation I ever did years ago. I turned up and they involved 5 people, and they were all told they had to created a kitchen rota so that they didn't actually spend time in the same room together. Wow. I mean, that's quite extreme. They'd moved desks around. So the first point is obviously it affects team dynamics. You know, if you can't work together as a team, you can't collaborate. Productivity falls. So there's a slump. It affects how we show up, how, morale, absenteeism, sick leave. The impact on the business, of course, is high turnover of staff, replacing people all the time if they go. The stress on the rest of the team if 1 or 2 team members go. So dealing with conflict early is just imperative, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But the types of issues, a breakdown, a personality clash is a very big one, and knowing how to manage those challenging personalities. You might bring in a new manager, for example, or a new middle management, or if you're a new business owner, bringing in a new team member. If you haven't done your onboarding well, so there can be an impact from bringing in somebody new at the start, not creating the right environment to introduce them to a new team. They might also not be the right person for the job in terms of the values that they have. Are they in line with your own values and what you are as a business all about? Because if you ask them to do something and they don't understand why that's important to you and they're not on the same page, that's just going to kick up a whole lot of sand and impact the relationship moving forward. So personalities is a big thing. People's communication style as well. And it's something that not a lot of people are aware of unless it's brought to their attention. And communication, let's be honest, isn't just what comes out our mouth. Yeah. How we deal with, people interrupting us. It's to do with our body language, our tone of voice, how we respond in emails. So unless that is brought to our attention and that is something that you can identify as that's really ruffling feathers within the team environment, you wouldn't necessarily know that that is something you need to work on or needs to be addressed.
It's so interesting, isn't it? Because I think awareness of self when you are the person doing the hiring and when you are even at the very beginning, for people listening to this that might just be starting to hire a VA or something, knowing how you are as, have you ever been a leader? Have you ever been a manager? Have you ever had to take anyone on? That level of self-awareness is so key. And you mentioned two things which I thought were really interesting. The first one about the personality, and I know certainly in my space, my listeners are probably very aware of things like the DISC assessment, of things like that. Have you found any benefit of that for organizations doing things like personality assessments before hiring people for certain roles?
I know a lot of organizations use that and rely on that an awful lot. I personally don't use that. I use, for me, it's about understanding people's values. So how they fit into a culture, I touched on it just before. I think it's great and clearly very effective. It's just I work in a different way. I find when people are labeled something, they often become that person. So if you're told you're an A, B, C, D, E, blah, de, blah, de, blah, you almost, people evolve into that because they feel they have to be that. They've been told it. Yeah. And I'm not saying obviously that's a huge generalization, but that's something I notice a little bit. So I prefer to work in a different way. And I like to work with what's in front of me and understand the person and what's important to them. And that's how I see where they fit in or don't.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, when I first started, I was obsessed with all these personality tests, absolutely obsessed. And on the Myers-Briggs, I think I've been about 4 or 5 different ones. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's me. Oh, no, that's me. And you get convinced that, that's why I'm like this. And I absolutely agree with you there. I think they're fun and I think they give you some sort of insight. But you mentioned values. And I think that's, how could someone become more aware of someone's values? Is that literally, because again, I've seen exercises, especially in my world, where people go, here's a list of values and circle which ones are your
pick
values.
5. Yeah, pick 5.
Pick 5 and that's you.
Yeah. I think it's about getting to know somebody, and this is a huge thing that I encourage at leadership level or business owners, is get to know your teams. Who are they? What's important to them? If they talk about their family a million times a day, then family is one of their top values. If they don't have kids and they talk about, justice and fairness and what's going on in the news and whatever, that's important. So knowing somebody is how I feel that you can understand who they are and what's important to them, and having that relationship. And that's mighty important when things go wrong. And you need to have a difficult conversation with them. If you have that rapport and you understand why something is important to them or why they haven't got you, it's often always to do with you're not on the same page, you're out of alignment, you have different things that motivate, drive you, upset you, anger you. So
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really important point for people to note, is actually we're talking about sort of conflict resolution and making sure that we're not having to get to that place. But actually, in terms of motivating your team, I worked in corporate, had a very large team, and some of them were absolutely motivated by money. The bonus structure worked perfectly for them, but it was few and far between. I've got to be honest. For many others, there was various different things that would motivate them. Some of them just wanted to feel seen and feel
recognized
and acknowledged. And wow, all I needed to do for that person is just go, you've done amazing today, and they're literally skipping out the door happy as Larry. And
completely,
important. They can work both ways.
Absolutely, and just understanding who they are and what drives them. And interestingly, a lot of mediations I've done over the years is based on that point, that somebody feels they haven't been recognized for the work they've done, or just appreciated, and that is, a massive driver for some people, massive. And the leader or the business owner just hasn't got it. And they're, I told you last week you did a great job on that, but that's not where they're at. No,
So you've had your annual appraisal. I said it was fine. What more do you want?
Come on, get move on. Yes, exactly.
Motivated. That's really interesting. And the second point that really stood out, because I've seen this go wrong, I've made this mistake early in my business, and I've seen this go wrong for other clients, is the onboarding. Onboarding, I think, especially for the small business owners or for the the solo entrepreneurs, your business inside and out. And I see so often them, the conversation, why don't they know what to do? Why are they doing it like that? It's like, well, have you shown them?
Yes, exactly. It's managing expectations. And, again, taking the time to, it's an awareness, I think, we, as starting out as new business owners or solopreneurs, as you said, you know your business inside out, but understanding that, this is new for them, and almost getting inside their head, perspective. Where are they sitting on this side on that side of the table? What do they need to know, rather than assuming? Assumptions. We all know what assumptions are, the mother of. So using, sitting on the other side of the table and assuming they know nothing, or presuming, or understanding that they're not in your head. So really important. But that onboarding thing as well is just around managing expectations. If you already have a small team, let's say, you've expanded a little bit already, just understanding the dynamics when you onboard of that new person, because everything is going to change within that small team. And I've seen this quite a lot in very small companies where they have maybe 4 or 5 employees and they bring in somebody new. That whole dynamic is going to change. Hopefully, they'll be the right fit for your business, assuming they are. You have to recognize the impact that is going to have on the rest of the team, and have open and honest conversations about it. This is Amanda, and this is what she's going to be doing, and she's here in this role, but we are a small team and we're all here to support each other. But if there are problems, let's talk about it. Because in a small environment, it's often more toxic when things go wrong than in a bigger environment. The impact of that. So it's really important to have a culture, an open culture, where you can have those transparent conversations done in the right way, so that if things do crop up, they are dealt with quickly. But if everyone's on the same page from day one, then it makes life so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, there are so many directions we could go. This could be like a 4-hour long episode. When it comes to, so let's start there then. So when we are looking at someone listening who maybe is looking at taking on their first employee, or maybe they do have that small team dynamic and they're needing to grow, the business is needing them to grow, what are the foundational layers that they can put in place to make sure that actually they're doing the best they can? I mean, I'm presuming, I don't actually know, but I'm guessing some kind of friction and conflict is going to maybe be inevitable as the business grows. But what can they do to make sure that they're putting the steps in place and the foundations in place to really nurture a good team dynamic?
I think in any business, the culture starts at the top. So I think, just as the point I made before, is making sure that there is an open culture of having respectful communication, a culture of respect, and transparency. Because when things go wrong, if you don't feel safe enough to speak up, or you feel embarrassed, or you feel that it's not the right environment, or that you'll be shut down, those conversations won't happen. So I think from the beginning there has to be a culture in place of honest, respectful. I have a little acronym that I made up called leading with heart, communicating with heart. One that people are your team are the beating heart of your business, but if you separate the letters HEART, so humility, empathy, authenticity, respect, and transparency. And I think if you can communicate with those 5 key pillars, you're going to be onto a really good footing moving forward. There's always one of those things that you need to have in set in place to have a good conversation, and it's a good structure to remember when you need to have those conversations from the start, from the get-go.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that, because I mean, again, I'm sure there's people listening. I'm reflecting on my corporate. I'm like, oh, some of the managers I worked with could have done with this training.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think actually the online space where I mainly am, I think there's such a movement with, big entrepreneurs like Steve, the Diary of the CEO podcast host. He's very
Steve Bartlett.
Yeah, very much talks about that sort of nurturing that sort of culture. And there's a lot more people talking about culture and impact and their team being the lifeblood of their business, rather than they're the minions, I'm the top, which is certainly my experience of working in a big organization. So I think, heart, that's something that I hope everyone listen back, scribble it down, because that's really, really valuable. Really valuable.
Yeah.
What else can they do?
I think certainly if you do start, I think always use curiosity. So when you think that you have to have a difficult conversation, or there's often a view that people bulldoze into these conversations and they tell people what they should do. Should is a terrible word. We just avoid that, because all that does is get somebody prickly. So I think when you start, when you sense that something might be a problem, always use curiosity, because people respond better to being asked, how do you think things are going, or do you think, did this go wrong, or why do you think this might have gone wrong, rather than bulldozing in and telling them you should have done it like that, or so inviting curiosity also gets people thinking. It's also a great way to influence change as well. If you want people on your side, you want to, if you're going through transition or expansion, that's a scary place for small companies, small businesses. So if you want your team on board, invite people's opinions, talk it through with them, ask them how they feel about it. They will become more committed to it if they feel part of it. So it's that inclusion, and the way you do that is inviting curiosity, invite them into the conversation, rather than, yes, often it is a fait accompli, this is what's happening, but if you invite them into it in a gentle way, this is what's happening, how do you feel about that? If there's a concern, how can we address that? How can we move this forward to make it easier for everybody? So it's that a slightly different approach, rather than, this is it, that's what's happening, guys, sorry.
Yeah.
whatever. So curiosity is a good one.
Yeah. And that's, do you know, I'm just, there are a few conversations I've had with clients who do have small teams has just sort of popped into my brain. How do you help your clients balance that curiosity, speaking to people very much like, valuing their opinions and all that kind of stuff with, well, actually I'm the boss and this needs to get done. And like, there is kind of, it's happening, we need to, it might be a new software system that they're needing to use and people aren't necessarily thrilled about it, but it's got to happen because the business is growing, or, something like that. I suppose how much softly time do we give people before we have to kind of sorry, love it.
Sorry.
we need to move you along from that I don't like it to accepting it because it's happening.
Yeah, I think you've got to use a little bit of, intuition at some point. And if there's a reason why somebody is very resistant still, after you've explained the why and, you've explained the importance of it for the business and how it's going to impact, their day-to-day, productivity and all the benefits and blah. If there's still resistance, there's a reason for it. And it might not just be because of the new software. There's a fear. I always say behaviors are a window into somebody's world. So if you are met with a lot of resistance or pushback or frustration, you need to explore that. Why is this feeling so difficult for you? And yes, there does seem to feel like it's a bit of an indulgence. I get that. And yes, it does feel like sometimes, for God's sake, just get on with it and do it. It's frustration. But if you know your teams and you know what they're about and you have a good relationship with them, you can sit down and have that conversation and just go, what's going on here for you? Why is this feeling so difficult for you? And let's explore that. Yeah. So it's almost a coaching approach, if you like, rather than I'm a boss leader approach. And I accept that can be very difficult for a lot of leaders because they're not coaches, but it's using that same curiosity, what is going on for you, as opposed to coming in with the, right, I've told you 5 times this is what happened, this is what is happening. Now tell me what's going on for you, why it's going to be hard for you to do this, and let's work it out, because maybe there's something else going on for them. Maybe they just freaked out by technology and they need a little bit more hand holding, which is okay. But you don't know that unless people, unless you ask.
Yeah. So, and I think it's really interesting because you mentioned that it's a more coaching approach, which, is absolutely what I was thinking when you were talking. And are you seeing that? Because as you said, business leaders aren't necessarily coaches. They haven't necessarily done even that sort of training. Are you seeing that become something that leaders are leaning in towards, are now investing more in? Are they seeing that value, especially after maybe working with you and kind of going, crikey, I want to avoid having these issues again?
Yeah. I think a good leader, I use the word loosely but an intuitive leader will recognize that perhaps they need to upskill and they need to understand how to do things differently. They need to develop their own skills. And part of that is, how can I do this differently? What I'm doing now isn't working. So it's an awareness, isn't it? Just, I think.
Yeah. But I love that it's becoming part of that dialogue. Like I said, it's been a long time since I've been in corporate, but it was hellish most of the time because I just didn't have a clue. And I look back now and I think, my gosh, how did you ever get away with treating people like that? It's just terrible.
But we can only do what work in a way with the skills we have at that time. And, I'm sure it wasn't as bad as you think it was. But if we don't know how to do it, we don't know how to do it. So, but I do feel that certainly over the last few years, there has been a lot more awareness at leadership level that they need to develop their skills, and even developing their middle management, the skills of their middle management, because that's often where the conflict takes place. It's, you have, up here, everyone's, on board, knows what they're doing, intuitive, got the t-shirt, been there, done that. But it's this new level where often the uncertainty comes in. And, that's an interesting thing, is a lot of people are really great at the job that they're doing, and then they're promoted into a managerial role without the proper training. And people management is a different job on its own. It's not something that, unless you are trained to do, you necessarily know how to do. And that's where I see a lot of problems as well. New managers who come in, they think they're meant to know it all, and they sort of bulldoze in, or they show up Teflon tough, and they haven't got a Scooby-Doo what they're doing. And so they sort of push their way through a situation, mismanage it. Then they get accused of bullying, and there's a grievance raised. And that's just the whole beginning of a long, costly, timely, stressful, 6 months. Actually, I have, the longest I've known for a conflict to happen within a business is 2 years. It went on for 2 years. Something I mediated last year. And I was quite, admittedly, one of the team members had been on maternity leave. So, but it hadn't been resolved before or after for 2 years.
Wow.
So it's a very stressful situation. So that all comes down from a lack of training at middle management.
Yeah.
Just that those skills are so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for entrepreneurs or people listening at the moment who are maybe thinking about that first hire, or they've just got their first office, so they need a couple of staff, where would you suggest they start? Because that's almost a bit of a minefield in whether, do they actually need to look at themselves first? Do they need to look at their processes? Do they need to work out who they need? Who's going to be, how far in advance do they need to be looking? If they're looking at a VA now, well, actually, do they then need a marketing manager? Like, where would you suggest that they start off if they know that they need other people now? It can't just be them. Where would you suggest?
I think it's important to identify the priority. What is the most pressing thing you need now? And yes, of course, you have to look into the future. But, if you are just, sorry, that sounded very dismissive. If you're looking for a VA, for example, be clear expectations, what you need from that person, and convey that. Make sure they are understanding what the expectations are of them. In a VA role, for example, that the important thing is to have that clarity, understanding, creating smart, the smart expectations when you ask them to do something. If you've never managed somebody before or had employees before, using that smart, I
know you mean,
specific, measurable, attainable. I've lost
realistic and timely.
Thank you very much. So make sure that they understand, that there's no wiggle room, that you're clear about, when they need it by, what you want, what that looks like. Can they do it? If not, come to me, let's discuss it, rather than you sort of slog along, and then when it's meant to be in, you haven't done it. Mm-hmm. So those are important things. If it's a longer term hire, it's important to make sure that, you are going back to those values things, you're on the same page. It's the right fit, that you understand yourself. Going back to what you said before, yes, you do need to have a little bit of self-awareness to understand what's important to you, your own values, because as we touched on before, when you're a small business and you're working closely together, you have to have that good rapport and a good relationship. So understanding who you are is sounds a big thing, but just what's important to you.
Yeah.
What do you expect and need your own standards. If you're somebody that likes your T's crossed and your I's dotted, and things have to be presented in a certain way, well, that's what you would expect of somebody who's coming into your business. They have to be aligned. So
absolutely. And I jotted down a couple of things there, because a lot of my listeners are very empathetic. Most of my audience is female, so very just very, very lovely people. And I've had people say to me, "Oh, I hired her, she was so lovely." And I'm like, lovely is great. Lovely person is great. However, we can't, but they're like, but I'm having to double do things or check things over. So how would you, because I think this is a really big point, and I don't want to be, stereotyping gender, but I do see this more so with my female clients.
Women, yeah.
People
pleasing.
Oh my gosh, the people pleasing. Hiring someone and doing the work yourself because you don't want to
don't want to upset them. Yeah.
Yes. So how do you help women and anyone that's sort of very empathetic and sort of has that people pleasing tendency to be strong in their own ability to be the boss, to be the leader?
Well, so this is really interesting, because I have sort of 4 archetypes that I think everyone, big generalization, a lot of people who have difficulty with having difficult conversations they have an element of one of these 4 archetypes, one of which is people pleasing. You have the imposter syndrome, you have the warriors who just pound in, and then the new inexperienced managers. People pleasers is, if you can identify, and this is quite a big ask, but it's important, if you can identify why you're scared of actually asking that person if they could do it. What are you scared of? Of them saying no, of upsetting them, of confrontation, of pushback. So if you can just pinpoint that first, and then working with someone like yourself or a coach of some sort, understanding, right, there is a way you can say this, which will take that fear away from you. So plan the conversation. Get in the right mindset before you start. Okay, if you're scared that they're going to be offended, well, what would they be offended about? Because you're critiquing their work. So if you learn the skills to say it in a way that isn't going to be prickly for them, and you can just articulate yourself in a different way that isn't going to create that pushback, that will help you actually have that conversation more constructively without offending or without the fear of offending, and then have something prepared in place in case you do get that response. So it's just a little process of, a plan, if you like, of what happens if. And, when we have those certainties in place, well, if that happens, I'll do that. If that happens, I'll do that. Then it's not so overwhelming and fearful, and we can manage it better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just, anyone listening to this, if you have a VA or an assistant and you're still doing the work that you hired them to do, there needs to be a conversation had somewhere. And it might be the first conversation is to have with yourself, because you hired someone because you knew your business needed it. And it's
absolutely,
it's that letting go as well. I do see
control.
You probably see that a lot as well, especially for businesses that you've come in to work with, and that person at the top built it up from, a laptop in their kitchen, and now they've got this team. I can imagine it can be incredibly challenging to let go of those reins.
Very hard. I've experienced that myself. I'm terrible with tech, and using sort of systems like Active Campaign. And, sometimes I need to get people in to help me do that. And I literally sit there and I'm on the edge of my seat, God forbid, they suddenly lose all my contacts or something. It's that trust as well. It's about trust. And as you said, yes, learn to let go as well. because you've birthed this baby, haven't you? Your new business is your business. So there is a lot of that fear that somebody isn't ever going to do it as well as you are. But as the point you made before is, if you're going to expand, you have to learn to let go of something. Something's got to give. You can't do it all. Yeah. So acknowledging and accepting that is part of expanding, and it feels uncomfortable, and being comfortable in your discomfort temporarily.
Yes. Yes. And I can certainly say I've been there, and I've made the mistake of very early on in my business, just throwing money at the situation, hiring someone to do my Instagram. I was like, okay, fine, great. She says she can do it. Just pay her the money and it'll be taken care of. That doesn't work either, because you have to do your due diligence and make sure, yes, people were great, but I didn't, again, going back to that onboarding, and I didn't do my research. I think a lot of people, for you people listening who are thinking about that first hire, don't just hire the first person because they were nice. Most people are nice. Make sure you actually interview a few people, do your research, actually do some background. Can they do what they say they're going to do? And again, everything you said about the values and the personality, spend a little bit of time getting to know them. Be a good fit, because if they are the sort of people that are going to reply to email with, a 2-word response, and that's going to freak you out because you think you've upset them, that's probably not the best person.
Right person for you. Yeah, absolutely.
So is there anything else before we wrap up today's episode? Is there anything else you would like to share that you feel would be sort of one of the core things that people just need to be aware of, so that, obviously they've got great people like you they can hire if they have got to this tricky stage, but to avoid them getting there in the first place? Anything else you want to sort of?
I think honesty is always, really important, to be able to have those honest conversations. I have another little meme. I say honesty, courage, and authenticity are a pipeline to connection rather than a barrier to communication. So if you can be authentic, honest, and courageous when if you have to address something, you're going to really solidify a relationship and set the foundations moving forward to be able to say things that you need to do openly and honestly. So it'll bring great things, rather than hiding behind, the people pleasing tendencies, which I know people pleasers are lovely people. They just want everything to be lovely. But unfortunately, running a business, that is a barrier to progressing your business. So having that courage, will get you to where you need to be. And I have one other little helpful tool I think is a quick one, is if you do have to have that conversation ever, to prevent those situations cropping up, to use a map. So a map is to manage your mindset before you start. Make sure that you are in a good headspace to whatever you need to go and do. Go and meditate, go for a run, go for a walk, listen to some great music, whatever works for you to get you into a calm state. Know the A stands for what do you want to achieve from the conversation. Make sure you have a goal and know the outcome. Do you want an apology? Do you want to make sure they understand? Do you want to end the relationship? What do you want to? I mean, I've been in situations with people where they need to sack somebody in a small business, and they end up actually not sacking them because they are so upset, so worried about offending them. So be clear about your goal, that, if you unfortunately need to, don't get derailed. And then the last point is just always prepare well for those conversations, because planning and having, just those little bullet points in front of you will stop you going off track, and will keep you focused.
That's really, really powerful. And it's really interesting that you said that, because the question that popped into my mind when you were talking is like, how do you manage people's emotions? Like, if they're in there and it's this big, conversation that they need to have, especially, if it's firing someone. Unfortunately, I did have to do that in my corporate career as well. It's not nice. Not nice at all.
Nice. No.
it's a very, very challenging situation to be in. So having that to, again, like you said, getting yourself centered, getting yourself grounded before having those conversations, it's really powerful, really, really powerful. And maybe not something when they're busy. I can imagine they're like, oh, hang on a minute, it's 12 o'clock. I've got to sack this person now. And then another meeting. And then
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Make time for it. And, it's never, listen, those conversations are never ones anyone wants to have. There was, I don't know if you saw in the news, I think it was before Christmas, there was a CEO, I forget the company. I don't want to say the wrong name. Was it better.com? Anyway, and he fired 900 people on a Zoom call. I mean, that's a perfect example of how not to do it. Anyway, that's not a compassionate conversation. That shocked us to the core. I don't know whether I have to say my first reaction being in Britain and knowing how many laws and rules and things like that there are, I was like, is that even legal? Can you get people on a Zoom call and just sack them with no notice? I'm like, is that okay? I'm sure not. He's taken some leave. I don't know if it's gardening leave, but he's taken some leave post that mass firing, I believe. Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised. But that's exactly, that's, a big extreme example, but for even, taking it right down to the sort of micro of the people listening, if they've got one or two, actually the way you deal with this is going to impact your reputation as a business owner.
Yes, exactly.
Going to impact the kind of people you attract, the things, because I do believe if you are fair and honest and all the things you said about authenticity and you really do come from that heart place,
genuine, yes,
then you can't really go wrong. Even if you do have to let someone go, it's for the right reasons, not because you had a bad day and you're like, that's it. You found me up.
You're out. Yeah, absolutely. Just always stay in your lane and be true to yourself. And, if you have to have those compassionate conversations, just be focused on the reason why and be yourself. And I know that's really hard. I understand that it's really hard. But there are tools one can use to help you through that. One thing that a lot of people tend to do in those situations is overtalk, and I think just the power of listening and allowing people to process what you've said is really important. For how the conversation moves forward.
Learning to be silent can be a painful lesson when you just having to sit. I remember having those conversations and I would just go silent. I just count in my head. I was like, don't say anything, don't say anything.
Absolutely. It's far more uncomfortable for them than it is for you. But in that moment, it doesn't feel like that.
No, absolutely. This has been a great conversation for something that's such a heavy topic, if you like. I really hope that the listeners have realised that it doesn't ever have to get to this stage.
Exactly.
If you implement what you've shared today from the very, very beginning for, hiring or just outsourcing things to your very first BA all the way up to running a team of a few hundred, these things are core 100%. Foundational levels.
Yeah.
Put in place.
And it's the same, as you said, from a small business up to a larger organization. The principles behind it are the same.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Where can people find you, find out more about you, connect with you? Where are you hanging out online?
I'm hanging out. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. My website is just going through an evolution at the moment. So I hopefully that will be, it's still, they can still find me now, but it's a lot more mediation focused and I'm gearing more towards the coaching and training. So they can find me. I'll obviously give you my links. And I can, Facebook as well. So
awesome. Well, I'll make sure that all the links to Nicole's work is in the show notes. And we're recording this in February, so I put Nicole on the spotlight there because actually I know that as I am going through a bit of a rebrand. So by the time this launches, all the fresh links will be in the show notes for you. So do reach out and work with Nicole if you feel you need to, because conflict resolution, I can't even, being someone who, I don't like conflict at all, I cannot even begin to fathom how uncomfortable it must be to be in a company where there's that person that you're like, oh, this is all going a bit wrong. So speak to Nicole if you've got that situation, because she will help you through it, and then it will be resolved in the right way.
You'll be relieved. I'm writing a book, and the title of it just just reminded me then, which was that feeling when you've had that conversation. It's like relief. So my book's called And Breathe. It's like that. Oh, thank goodness that's over. So anyway, that will be out in the summer, hopefully.
Amazing. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I will be sure this will release in the spring at some point when you guys are listening to it. But I will be sure to stay in touch with Nicole, and I'll add the link for the book. So depending on when you guys are listening to this, there may be the book available for you to purchase as well. Nicole, it's been a pleasure. Thank you
so much for having me. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, any resources and links mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. If you're enjoying this podcast, I would be so grateful if you would kindly share, subscribe, and leave a positive review so that the podcast can help and reach as many people as possible. Thank you again for listening. Have a gorgeous day, and I'll see you in the next episode.